You're listening to Today at Museum of the Bible with Chief Curatorial Officer Dr. Jeff Kloa. These exclusive conversations with authors, scholars, and leaders visiting the museum focus on how they are currently engaging with the Bible in their lives and work.
Welcome to part 2 of the Samaritans of Biblical People podcast series.
I'm here with Charlotte Clay.
And I'm here with Dr. Jeff Kloa.
And we're here at Yeshiva University in New York City, live from New York, right? With Professor Stephen Fine, who is the director of the Center for Israel Studies at Yeshiva University, long-published, well-published author in ancient Judaism, the history of ancient Judaism, and the lead curator of an exhibition called The Samaritans of Biblical People at Museum of the Bible, also the editor of a book called Samaritans of Biblical People, and the creative force, I guess you'd say, or what was your role with the film, documentary?
It was my film.
Your film.
And what about the cookbook?
Which is also called Samaritans of Biblical People.
Now, the truth is, everything that we did, first of all, hello, everybody. Welcome to Yeshiva University.
Thank you, Stephen. Yeah.
The wonderful thing about our project, whether it be the film, which was made by Moshe Alafi, which we commissioned, or whether it be the exhibition, which we did with you guys at the Museum of the Bible and is now in Frankfurt, or whether it be the book, which we published with Brill Publishers and is big and beautiful, or the cookbook that came to us, which is just plain fun.
Yeah.
The amazing thing about this project is that we were able to create an environment of all for one and one for all. Mm-hmm. And so if the filmmaker Moshe Alafi saw that something was missing at the Museum of the Bible, he would tell the Museum of the Bible. And if the people in Germany saw something was missing from the movie, he would say something to the film. And at a certain point, everybody was in New York for the initial showing of the film.
Yeah, it was amazing.
And it created a community of people that it's quite astonishing.
Yeah.
And the other piece that's been astonishing is being able to build our students through the project. And so my assistant curator, David Sellis, was actually my freshman. And now he's a doctoral student.
Wow.
And so
And Jesse,
David's
of course,
the most
yeah.
obvious example, but there are
Right.
a dozen other kids who've been involved at one point or another with the museum, with the film. I remember one day when Moshe Alafi was up at 4 a.m. because my students had watched the films for the exhibition and they were going to critique them for him. And so from Israel, he was on Zoom talking to the students, and the students were so utterly empowered by all of this, which is exactly what happened with us at the Museum of the Bible as well. And I hope with every visitor who comes through, this is an empowering moment to let the light bulb go on and say, wow, this is neat.
Yeah.
Yeah, the observation I've had when I go into the gallery is people spend a long time in that exhibit. There's a lot of rich material. There's so much to see, and they're not in there for 10 minutes just looking at the cool stones, right? They're immersed in the topic, which is a great. That's what you want, right?
And
That's
every
what you
time I've gone through, both at the beginning and further on through the show, the variety of people in that exhibition who came clearly for that exhibition from all over. Says that there is a interest and a concern and just a curiosity that we've been able to
Unlock
tap into.
and tap into. Yeah.
Right. Now, Stephen, the probably the defining thing for the Samaritans, the defining event annually is the Passover sacrifice, and that's what people hear about. That's what's intriguing. That's probably what's most different, if you will, from, if that's a fair way to say it. But why don't you talk a little bit about the Passover, how they celebrate it there? Well, just get started, because there's a lot to unpack with the Passover.
Okay, so everybody knows Passover is a spring holiday, and that in Hebrew it's not called Passover, it's called Pesach, which
right.
means the paschal sacrifice. It's very clear.
Same in Greek, by the way. But anyway.
Absolutely, Pascha, and in Syriac and in all those other languages.
Everybody else except English. Yeah.
It's true. So Samaritans and Jews went in really different paths in commemorating this holiday. Everybody knows it's a spring holiday. Everybody knows you eat unleavened bread with bitter herbs, and that you talk about going out of Egypt. That's the biblical frame, right? Once you have the biblical frame, however, Jews, being a deeply textualized community with a very broad diaspora, created a festival meal without the Passover sacrifice, because the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed in 70, and this decision was made within a few hundred years, no more Passover sacrifices, not even any broiled meat, right? In fact, those people who know the 4 questions that usually the smallest child asked, the 4th one used to be, on all other nights we eat all kinds of meat. How come this night we eat boiled, roasted, and baked?
And that one was taken out
That
of
was
the
taken out and
Haggadah.
replaced with the sitting part.
Okay.
Right? And all other nights you sit all however we want. Tonight we sit reclined.
Right.
And so a long period of construction focusing on the parts of the holiday that could still reasonably be celebrated. I always like to say that, the left arm comes off, you use your right arm more. You become blind, you hear better.
Yeah.
You focus on your hearing, right? As a community, the ancient rabbis figured out what was there and what could be done about it,
Right.
and continued into the future, right?
Right.
Now, in the first century, though, it was different. People would, in the optimal case, and go to the temple, or probably locally as well, and they would sacrifice a lamb, and they would barbecue it, essentially, right? And
I mean, it's a different thing in Texas, by the way, but keep going.
there's no sauce.
Yeah.
And so they would put it in the ground and cook it fully, and then take it out and eat it, as the Torah says, with unleavened bread and bitter herbs, and then maybe sing some songs, and usually psalm kind of stuff, right? And drink wine, and that was the meal. Now, that's the meal that's most like the Last Supper, by the way. I just
Right.
point that out,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
It's not like the Passover Seder that's
Right.
developed
It
in
developed, right, yeah.
subsequent centuries,
Oh, interesting.
right?
Yeah.
Now, Samaritans did it differently. Their holy place was destroyed by the Hasmonean king, John Hyrcanus, in the end of the 2nd century, before the Common Era. But they never gave up on their mountain. And at least for those who lived close, they every year continued sacrificing a lamb and roasting it, I guess, cooking it underground
Right.
in a stove, in an oven, and taking it out and taking the unleavened bread that they made and the bitter herbs and sitting it as a community, as families, each group,
Right.
Right.
eating it. And there'd be as many lambs as there were
Families.
families.
Right.
So today, with 850-something people, they use 60-some lambs.
Wow.
But not so long ago, they used 10 or 5,
Wow.
the
Right.
really small numbers,
Right.
because their numbers have gone up so
Right.
amazingly. Now, the Passover sacrifice has been attracting Westerners to come
Yeah.
and watch it.
Yeah, it was kind of the first thing that really, I think, caught attention, wasn't it, in the 19th century?
Yeah.
Among the kind of Protestant visitors, right?
Protestant visitors looked at it and said, that looks like the Torah. Jewish visitors did too, by the way. So they all went up there and they, that looks like the Torah. That's cool.
Yeah.
That was number one. It was that's cool.
Right.
And then, here's the important part. The Prince of Wales
Yeah, right.
was sent by his parents on a trip of the East.
Well, what year was it again?
In the 1850s.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
Okay? So the Prince of Wales, who they called Bertie, I just don't remember his official
Oh,
name.
yes.
Right? The Prince of Wales was sent on a trip by his parents to see the world. And the British consul in Jerusalem, this guy named James Finn, manipulated the schedule such that he showed up on Mount Gerizim for the sacrifice. Now, that made all the British papers, and this fellow knew what he was doing.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
interest in the Samaritans outside developed. And so his whole tourist industry, first, there were like 20 Samaritans on top of a mountain. 120 Samaritans on top of a mountain.
Yeah, doing this weird
Doing
ancient
this thing, going
Yeah.
up there in their poverty, right? Killing a lamb. We have a story in the exhibition that we asked a group of seniors, what would you want to tell your grandchildren? What story would you like to transmit?
Yeah.
And one of our stories is about the year that the sacrifice almost didn't happen because they couldn't afford it and they couldn't find a lamb.
Wow.
Right?
So expensive. Yeah.
Sure. And so, and everything's expensive when you have nothing.
Yeah.
Right.
And so, over time, since the 1850s, Westerners started coming to watch this event. Now, Samaritans are smart people, and they understood very quickly that Westerners were manipulatable. And
That's a good way to say it.
their relations with the Turks were not so good, but as long as their relations with the British and the Americans and the Germans and the French were good, they were protected.
Right.
And so Passover became the time when all those people came up. Now, lots passed through. Mark Twain passed through.
Right.
And bought books or bought copies of books or whatever, which is why Western libraries are so full of Samaritan books,
Yeah.
which is what supported them. They started actually writing them and making drawings
Yeah.
of the tabernacle. You can see a few of them in our exhibition.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
And so they started making all these tourist
Yeah.
items.
Tourist tchotchkes, right?
Yeah. They started making these really neat things, though. If I'd owned them, I'd be so happy.
Yeah.
But the exhibition has some cool ones. They made little Torah scrolls.
Right.
They made all sorts of stuff that they sold to Westerners who came up there. But more to the point, they developed relations. And so the Passover sacrifice became a time for British dignitaries, and then because British dignitaries, Ottoman dignitaries.
Sure.
And then and so over time it became this big thing to the point that today it takes place in a space that looks more like a stadium.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because after the 6-Day War, Israelis came in mass the following year. It became almost a government event. And the other interesting thing is it's one of the few times a year that you can see Palestinian soldiers sitting on a bench next to Israeli soldiers guarding an event.
Yeah.
Because it's, Samaritans, and they have relations with both, and they live on the borderline. And because they live in this precarious fiddler-on-the-roof place, right, the Passover sacrifice is the moment. Forget the blood, forget the meat, forget the families. When they get to assert their centrality and act on their place in contemporary culture. And that's so interesting watching how that developed. The neat thing that we did in the exhibition was that we have some of those 19th century photographs of what it was like. And then we have film from the British Mandatory period of what it was like. And then we have a room with a big sign that said, "You are about to enter the Samaritan sacrifice."
No blood is shown, by the way.
No blood is shown.
Don't take your child in here.
No, you can. We were so careful.
It's
Yeah,
fine.
I got a little scared, I will say.
I'll tell you what we did. We had a big debate about how much blood could be shown.
Yeah.
And so we went to some important curator friends and said, okay, how much blood can we show?
Right.
We don't have very much.
Not very much.
Yeah.
And none of it is in the act of killing.
Right.
But the reality is we recoil because, we're used to buying our meat wrapped in plastic.
Yes.
But these people who live closer to the farm.
Right, to the
right,
land.
it's not so weird to have sacrifice, have animals killed in the butcher shop.
Right.
You can go in the Bronx here and take in a chicken and have it killed and take it home.
Right.
It's not so far from many people that we live with as well.
Yeah.
It's just that my chicken comes wrapped in plastic.
Yeah.
And so...
Killed by a machine, but
Yeah. And I would probably just have a salad if I had to do it myself.
And my wife is a vegan, yes. And so the Passover sacrifice is cool and interesting.
Yeah,
And the
and
reaction of the
ancient,
community.
yeah.
And ancient, but modern.
Right.
Now, we have to be really careful.
Yeah.
Everyone likes to say, my ceremonies are the oldest ceremonies
Sure.
ever in the history of the human race. And theirs are old.
Yeah.
Right? But they're not fossils, the way Mark Twain called them.
Right.
They're a living community.
Right.
And so where do they get the skewers for the animals?
Yeah.
At the lumberyard.
Yeah.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Yeah. Well, it is a memorable scene. I mean, both in the documentary and in the film and the exhibit, just the way the families come together. You see the roasted meat kind of steaming as they're walking through the streets, and
it's synchronized sacrifice. That's what struck me.
Yeah, it's,
Everyone all at once. They yell
Yes.
out in Aramaic. There's En Ella Ella Ella. There's only one God,
Right.
Yeah.
And
Right.
it's so powerful
It's
as
so
they're doing
powerful.
it, and as they're singing
Yeah.
liturgical poetry. It
Yeah.
sounds so boring when I say it, right?
No,
Singing
it's
liturgical
But
poetry.
you have
it's
to
like
come-
a stadium chant.
Yes,
I mean, it's a
watch
remarkable
it.
scene. It's
It's a
Yeah.
remarkable scene.
Yeah.
And the other piece is, because of their numbers, they have brought in some non-Samaritans in the last 100 years, which is how they've been able to raise the numbers, because their genes were not creating enough women to
People.
go with all the boys. No, it's very specific. They had developed some sort of problem having only 119 people.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
of being ingrown.
Yeah.
And so the way that the newcomers are accepted is by the way their conversion, if you will, is do they let them eat the sacrifice or do
Right.
they not? And so at the end of our film, for example, without being too much of a spoiler, the person who joins the community, you see her also eating the Paschal sacrifice, showing that this worked. This enculturation.
And where was that woman from?
Ukraine.
From Ukraine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which and from Kherson, which some people may remember that Kherson has had a very hard time in recent months.
Yes. Yes.
And so people ask often about the women who've joined the community. There are 30-some, most of them Ukrainians.
Wow.
And why Ukrainians? Because one woman brought her friend, who brought her friend, who brought her friend, and this dating scene developed.
Yeah. Yeah.
That at first I thought, could this be okay? And
Yeah.
the truth is, it's completely savory. It's completely above board, right? People went back and forth. They had conversations. They liked each other. They paired up, and now they're building lives together.
Right. Right. And this was the documentary was created in what year?
Just now.
Just okay. Yeah.
Yeah, but it was really poignant, actually. The first time we saw it in March of last year was just less than a month after the invasion of Ukraine.
Yeah.
And Kherson was a major battle site in
So
that
it was
early
filmed
period.
before
It was
that
filmed before
invasion.
that,
It
yeah.
looks so okay.
Yeah, it looked like a normal city, and then to see it in the news,
Yeah.
the devastation.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting.
People have responded to the film much more strongly because of that connection. Now, we didn't stress that element
Right.
of Samaritan culture in the exhibition.
No, it didn't come up really at all. There's
Right.
the marriage section.
We
comes up
did
just
it.
a
It's
little
there.
bit,
There's
but
some photographs.
It's very minor.
Right, because it is minor in a 3,500-year history. And one of the things that people I think will like in this project is that we didn't deal with the Palestine-Israel problem all the time. We didn't deal with people leaving the community all the time. We didn't deal with the marriage problem all the time. It's all there, but it's not the centerpiece. The centerpiece is, who do these people want to tell us they are? And who are they? And how do we respond to them in our own sections, right?
Yeah.
And so it's unusual because, our film was made by Moshe Alafi, as I said, and he was embedded with the community for 5 years. People told him stuff that they would never tell anybody on screen, things that I would never say on screen were coming out on screen.
Yeah.
And people were discussing it with a level of comfort because trust. And they knew that their stories were going to be then a mirror for their community. They were well aware that they could have an internal conversation based on all of this. And so it's super important to me, whether we're dealing with the Passover sacrifice and even that conversation about how nervous we are about blood. Right?
Yes.
And killing animals and all that.
Yeah. But whether we're dealing with the Passover sacrifice or the wedding stuff or any of it, that the story is the story that this community lives in a world where we're talking about appropriation constantly as a subject for how do communities live together. we, from the very start of this project, before the word appropriation ever showed up on our
Yes.
right, weren't appropriating. And part of that, frankly, is because I'm so cautious. I don't like being trivialized.
Yeah.
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 And I won't
Right.
trivialize someone else. Right?
Yeah.
I don't want to be the Jewish guy that I'm the one a Christian has ever met. Right? And so, there's a Jewish guy. Let's put him in the zoo.
Right,
I don't want
right.
to put the Samaritans in the zoo. And the same way that when a pious Christian comes on my campus, I don't want that person in the zoo either.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Or when I come to your campus.
That's exactly what I'm describing.
You're talking about Jeff.
Well, I'm talking about both of you
Yes,
guys.
yes.
But when the bishops come in, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And for official visits, I don't want any of us to feel anything less than who we are.
It's going back to what you've said about the 95% being okay.
Well, and treating each other as
Yeah.
the Good Samaritan did, right?
Yes.
It's
Yes.
pretty fundamental, basic
It's a
stuff.
pretty
Yes.
fundamental, basic question of
Yeah.
how we live together.
Yeah.
And what I hope this podcast has done and continues to do is demonstrate how we, in real life, live together to the people out there who have never met any of us.
Yeah.
Well, can I ask kind of a reflection question? Because for the Samaritan community, obviously the Passover is their defining story, their defining event. I mean, just to see, when they smear the blood and the emotion that comes out, it's transformative, right? When you, as a devout person, see that, how do you have the same kind of perspective on the Passover? Does it have a different function? How does that relate to your kind of holding up that mirror a little bit?
Look, Moshe Alafi went in and said, "Oh my God, these are my ancestors. Oh my God, this is what it looked like." And that was my first, maybe second and third response.
Okay.
Right? That is the first response. Oh, this is what it must have looked like.
Yeah.
Right.
My fourth, fifth, and 12th response, though, is, this is what sacrifice is. This is what community looks like as part of
Right.
sacrifice. Right? I became much more interested in watching the emotion
Right.
and the ritual. And, you read all the way through the Torah, starting at the end of Exodus, and you're describing this tabernacle thing. And then you go to Leviticus, and there's no end to the blood, right? Going all the way through Leviticus.
Skip that stuff, right?
Yeah, Christians can skip it. We can't.
Yeah.
And so the astonishing thing is, for my students, it's often very theoretical
Right.
and textual.
Right.
And it was for me too. When it becomes human like this, it becomes something that I say, wow, I get it. I can feel this in a way that, and you should sprinkle this blood and you should sprinkle that blood. Or,
Right.
On Yom Kippur, we reenact the service of the high priest
Right.
on Yom
Right.
Kippur and bow down on the ground and talk about the sprinkling of blood on the curtain and all that. And I always knew this was cool. I like the theatrical part
Yeah,
of liturgy.
yeah.
It's cool,
Right.
But watching it through Moshe's camera, more than watching it in person even, watching it through Moshe's camera where he's focusing in on your face and
Right.
your face and my
it's
face
very,
Right.
very
and the
intense,
children and the
right.
little baby with the Mickey Mouse hat. And, the just utterly normal experience of sacrifice that can't come through a book and can't come through this is what the tabernacle was like.
Right. Right.
Right?
Yeah, it's an experiential. You're part of it in a very different way.
When you walk into that Passover sacrifice, remember we do have the warning sign, so no one should be
Yeah,
nervous. When you walk into that
Yes.
Passover sacrifice, it should be a wow, because that's what we were trying to create.
It's a moment of transcendence almost that you can feel. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
You've really done the liminal transformation. You've gone out of Egypt, and you've consumed it. Now, look, in the Middle Ages, when Jews would hold up a Passover matzah, Christians would often say, gee, it looks just like the way Christians behave looking at the host, right?
Yeah.
Now, but for Jews, eating dinner on Passover is not that.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Right.
For Christians, especially for Catholics and Greeks, right, and for the Orthodox churches,
Yeah.
it's closer.
It is, very
but
much
it's
so.
not this.
And it still might be
Yeah.
completely catered, and you didn't do the
Well, it's
You're not in it putting the lamb in the earth and
right.
the whole thing. Yeah.
Well, and in liturgical traditions, Christian traditions, it's a weekly event rather than an annual, so it doesn't have perhaps the uniqueness to it.
So that's the perfect reason to come see the Samaritans, a Biblical People at Museum of the Bible before it leaves April 16th.
And it's so cool. Please join us.
Yes, yes.
Well, thanks, Stephen, for the invitation to be here.
Thanks for coming to YU.
Thank
Come back
you.
very soon.
We
Love
will.
to do it. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to Today at Museum of the Bible. Join us again to hear how authors, scholars, and leaders are engaging with the Bible every day. Only on Today at Museum of the Bible.